All right, for those of you fortunate enough not to know me, my name is Mike Ware. I've been a member of this church for over 25 years, and this is my stepping story. For the last decade or so, I've had the privilege of volunteering with an organization called Forever Young Veterans, located right here in Collierville, Tennessee. And about 4 years ago with that organization, I got the privilege of escorting a bunch of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam veterans to Washington, D.C. And we got to the hotel in Washington, D.C. Diane Height, the founder and president of Forever Young, asked me if I mind changing roommates because her cohort out of, I think, Huntsville, Alabama, had befriended a World War II veteran who had had a lot of health issues, was depressed, and was just sitting in his apartment wanting to die. So I immediately said yes. So I walked up, I met Mr. John, and Mr. John and I, we proceeded up to our room. I pushed him up there in his wheelchair, and I put him next to the bed, and I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I said to Mr. John, "Tell me your war story." And he goes, no, I don't talk about that. I said, "John, you may be an axe murderer, and I need to know because I'm going to be living in this room with you. So tell me your story." So John looked up, and he kind of did what I did there. He kind of smiled and laughed. "Axe murderer, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, you look innocent, but..." Well, he started telling me a story, and he had joined the Navy, and at age 19, he'd been trained as a Higgins boat driver, which is the landing craft that carries the troops to the shore when they do an invasion. His first time in war was at an atoll called Tarawa, which is in the Gilbert Islands in the South Pacific. It was a horrible battle, and on a November morning, November 20th, actually around 9 o'clock, he remembers it to the T, they started to the shore, and all the Marines he was hauling in was saying how they were going to die, and he would tell them, "No, I'm bringing you back to this ship." So, no, well, the high tide hadn't come in, so he had to stop early. Some of them jumped off the landing craft, and he's seen a lot of them did not come back up. He proceeded on into and let off the rest of the troops, and as he was leaving, he saw how they got caught in crossfires and the injuries and the downing that was going on. And for the next 3 days, John delivered new troops to the beaches with supplies and also carried injured Marines back to the boats. And after 3 days, they handed John a shovel, put him in charge of a burial detail to bury several of the Marines that were still on the beach. John took that very seriously, and he went in and he gave them the honor that they deserved, even though they had to bury him in a mass grave. And at this time, John was crying, and I just put my arm around him and said, "John, everything's going to be okay." So for the next 4 days, we toured Washington, D.C., and he got to talk to other war veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam. He heard their stories, they heard his stories, and you could just see God working in his life and just getting him up. And he started joking with people and smiling and using his walker some as compared to the wheelchair that he was always in. Well, the last morning we get down, and I've got his wheelchair waiting at the front door. So he shows up at the front door, and he looks at me and he says, "Mike, today I'm just going to use the wheelchair as my walker, so I'm going to walk to the bus pushing the wheelchair." And I said, "Oh, that's great." So I run around and I jumped in the wheelchair. And he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I pushed you for 4 days. It's about time you pushed me somewhere." So John did. We pushed him out there, and a lot of people took a lot of interest in that little bit. But it just showed you God had started working in John's life. And later that day, we had to separate. He was going back to Alabama, and I was going back to Tennessee, and you just see his arms go up, and we embraced. And we just had a wonderful time. I tell that story because you never know when God is going to want you to go out there and be a presence in someone's life. And not just present physically, but present to listen. Not listen to respond, not listen to try to fix, but listen to show compassion and listen to show empathy, because we're just caregivers. Christ is a cure giver. We say that in Stephen Ministry all the time, and I will tell you, seeing John progress through that week was an amazing display of how God can truly give you peace. John's story doesn't end there. For the next 3 years, John became a fixture in his community, went to football games, he got honored, had parades. I mean, he was just amazing, and we would communicate. And about 1.5 years later, John got the opportunity to go on another trip out to Hawaii. And while they were in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor with the Forever Young organization, they went up to the Punch Bowl, which is the National Cemetery. And whenever they went into the National Cemetery, in the first briefing they said, "You will see new graves here that have just been dug. We just interned from the atoll of Tarawa, 38 Marines who had been buried on the beach there. And they stopped them and they said, this man buried people there." And after a short discussion, they realized they were the ones that John had buried. So they took John to every one of the graves. They got to say goodbye. That is God's handiwork. Because John's, all of his nightmares, all of his inner conflict was healed. John came back, and about a year later, he started going down. And they called me and they said, "John would like to see you again." So I drove down to Decatur, Alabama. And John and I spent about 2 hours together, talking, holding hands. And he was singing hymns to me. And he was asking me to go back and find people from 70 years before to make sure that they knew he was sorry for something they'd done. And I tried to convince him, "John, in 70 years, I have a feeling they probably forgot." His nieces told me he had never sang a hymn in his life. So you can see the power of presence, because once he went back, Christians took him in. Chris, who runs the operation there, a strong Christian, befriended him and had him do all those things. So in the last 5 years, he said he had been happier than had ever been in his life. So I'll tell you that story only to tell you that if Christ can give you, as David would say, great peace, after 70 years of holding this inside, just think what he could do now, because there's a lot of Johns out there. You just have to be able to accept Christ's invitation to take that stepping story or that stepping stone and get in their lives, and to listen for compassion, listen for understanding, listen for empathy. Blessings.